Good morning. This is Monday, August 24th, around 7:45 in the morning, and I got my Twitter feed up right now. As you can see on the right, there's for those of us who are not very active on Twitter, there's always a today's news column here, and it flags some of the more trending news, which is essentially what they claim is a curation of the tweets, but also then Grok synthesizes that and presents the news for you. Now, as you can see, there are three core pieces, and it's not a surprise that Dr. Abdul Sayed, Palestine, and Hasan Piker are the main core topics for them. And it's not surprising also because mainstream media, as you know, has obviously decided that they will talk about Piker more than they will talk about actual news. So when you click on this, it shows up as an actual trending feed, and it says Hasan Piker's Israel comments spark anti-Semitism accusations in Michigan state race. Now, again, this was a conversation that Hasan was having on one of his latest shows, where he was again just clarifying that continuing to conflate Jewish people with Israel's genocide in Gaza is not the smart approach, and it continues to put people in jeopardy, which Mike Rogers immediately got on and tweeted yesterday and says more calls for violence coming out of the Abdul al-Sayed campaign. Here is his running mate, and that is incorrect. Hasan Piker saying that if American Jews support Israel, they will be violently targeted because of that. And it's really absurd to even say something like, because you can tell even in the DSA watch, which is has been like clip baiting people. Even in this clip, it's very clear what Hasan's actually saying. Let me just show you this real quick. There you go.
Why? Because people don't fuck with Israel any longer. And if Jews in America keep putting this idea out there that they are singularly invested in Israel, eventually someone's going to come around and take action, not against the state of Israel, mind you, but against American Jews. Okay? We're teaching people the wrong lesson. I don't know how people don't recognize how dangerous this predicament is, how dangerous this is for Jews. You're running around basically tying your entire identity to a country that inevitably will be seen as basically Jewish ISIS. And you're saying, as Jews, this is all we care about. You're making anti-Semitism worse. And you want to know why? Because people don't fuck with
The good thing
Israel.
is that I know a lot of Jewish friends and allies who are very actively pushing against it, which is a good thing. Not every Jew agrees with what's happening in Israel. And then within the notes, you can see that there's like several people slowly joining in, talking about Hasan not calling not just for violence, but also talking about how it's not wise to do that. And it's interesting how one of the notes here says Hasan is endorsing collective punishment for Jews. Collectively, it is exactly, he is pushing against, if you think about it. But again, it's difficult to get people to understand that. And it's also a challenge because a lot of the mainstream news anchors and a lot of platforms discourage this conversation because they for years we have not talked about how the anti-Semitism dog whistle has been used to silence necessary conversations. Case in point, the recent accusation at the Hulk, Mark Ruffalo, where he was called out by Paramount as an anti-Semite just because he was clarifying that the use of Oracle's technology was not just morally repugnant in accelerating the genocide in Gaza, but also how the merger itself will consolidate the entire news industry and storytelling industry and film industry, and essentially stop any potential conversation about some of the more important pieces that we should be talking about. Now, when DSA Watch and Mike Rogers tweeted this, Hasan responded and said rightly, says falsely tying Israel to Jewish people is increasing anti-Semitism. This isn't a call for violence. What your favorite Nazi agitator Jake Lang does daily is putting Jews and Muslim Michiganders in actual danger. And then he adds that press release that was there, which this is the same person who was actually part of the entire campaign as well. So I think Hasan's doing the right thing, getting ahead of this, but it's not easy to do that because there's just way too many people invested in making sure that the conversation is not about the policies, and this conversation about anti-Semitism just becomes front and center because that's just one way of using that as a distraction. So I'm fascinated by Insurrection Barbie, and she has a little over 1 million followers. And of course, it's mostly people with something like this in their profile. And she says, if you are Jewish, Christian, atheist, or agnostic, you have to understand by now that voting for the party that supports this degenerate means you support messages like this. And this is what I'm talking about. The anti-Arab, anti-Muslim Islamophobia prejudice is so normalized that she's excluding Muslims here, deliberately making anyone out there think that this is a Muslim versus everyone else problem, which you and I know is not true. I like the comment Zed's making here. Probably 100% of Muslims would agree, yes, that Al-Qaeda and ISIS harm the image of Muslims in the world. Heck, probably 95% of the Americans would agree with that. Yet, if you make the same argument about Israel and Jewish people, dorks like Jeremiah crash out. And that is true. This is a conversation that we should have had decades ago, but obviously we did not. The actions of the Israeli regime should not be conflated with the actions of all Jewish people. That is what Hasan Piker is saying as well. Hawk said something very interesting. I personally like this guy, and he's been making a lot of sage arguments. Let's hear what he has to say.
Yeah, and it's the reason that, and it's my last question for you, because you've been a part of many a media frenzy covering what you have to say. What do you make of the media frenzy around Hasan Piker right now and his role on a couple of campaign trails for lots of progressive challengers?
To be honest with you, I find it kind of weird. Like, he's a streamer. This guy is not an elected official, and there's a lot of elected officials out there that are saying incredibly horrible things. Look at this Andy Biggs conversation, right? Like, you have two candidates, one who's a huge Islamophobe and one who is clearly an anti-Semite, and we can't seem as a party to acknowledge that both of those things are really, really bad, right? And I think that it's fascinating that people are so obsessed with a streamer that the median voter knows nothing about. That's not to diss Hasan. I think he would probably agree with me generally that like they don't know who he is. And I think it speaks to the fact that a lot of moderates in our party don't have an actual vision that they are fighting for other than the center, because they're constantly repositioning themselves on the political spectrum to say, I'm going to be in the middle, but the middle is always changing. And instead, what people are looking for is somebody that actually offers a new vision.
Basically, to say that they're only trying to move the goalpost, they are not talking about actual policies and essentially just trying to distract by making Hasan Piker the crux of the conversation, while we should actually be talking about policies.